In today's video, we're taking a look at some offseason rumors concerning the Calgary Flames and New York Islanders, and we also have a lot of other NHL news from around the league, including damage to Edmonton's arena in a big storm last night. We have the Vezina Trophy nominees, and a whole lot more. We'll jump into all that coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot to cover today, a lot of little news items from around the NHL, as well as a few offseason rumors. Let's kick things off with a couple of signings. Now, the Tampa Bay Lightning have signed former Rangers prospect Sean Day, who's a defenseman, to a one-year, two-way contract. Now, in case you're not familiar with Day, he kind of has a unique story in the fact that when he was a junior hockey player and going into the Ontario Hockey League, he was given exception status to enter a year younger. Now, we've seen other players given that status to really top players, like guys like Connor McDavid, John Tavares, Aaron Ekblad, who all went on to become first overall selections. But in Sean Day's case, after he was given that status, he never really lived up to the hype. In his draft year, he ended up getting drafted by the Rangers in 2016 into the third round, bounced around within junior teams as well. And then, of course, after 2 years of pro hockey, the Rangers cut him loose. He pretty well played split evenly between the East Coast League and the American Hockey League. He couldn't even stick as a regular in the AHL, so many felt his NHL opportunities would likely come to an end. Maybe he would go play professional hockey in Europe, but the Lightning have given him a chance here, so somewhat surprising signing. The best case scenario, he plays in their American Hockey League team would be my guess, but we'll see what the former exceptional status player can do to revive his career. Now, sticking with signings, of course, it was highly rumored and speculated that the Canucks were going to bring back former defenseman Nikita Tryamkin, who had been playing for the last few years in the KHL. There's a lot of reports and rumors suggesting that there was a contract that was imminent, it was close to happening, it was a high probability, but in fact, it's not going to happen now. Tryamkin has signed a one-year deal to remain in the KHL. After listening to an interview with his agent, basically came down to the fact that the Canucks were very interested, but at the same time, they were just not able to squeeze it in under the cap. This flat cap that we're going to be dealing with is going to be impacting a lot of teams, and there's just no way that they could do a one-way deal for the kind of money that Tryamkin wanted. So he'll go back and play in the KHL and revisit the possibility of coming to Vancouver after one more year. His agent did mention that if the Canucks can kind of get their salary cap situation sorted out, that they could revisit this next offseason. So I guess we'll see, but the rumors of Tryamkin going back to Vancouver for now are off to the wayside while he goes back to Russia. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot of other news and notes from around the league, including some damage to Edmonton Oilers Arena, Rogers Place. Edmonton had a really freak thunderstorm last night and ended up with a lot of flooding damage to part of the arena, the part that's referred to as Ford Hall. There are statements out there indicating that this is not going to have any kind of an impact on the Oilers training camp that's going on. Of course, Edmonton is also going to be a hub city for the Western Conference playoffs. So, of course, that was a major concern when all this news and everything started coming out last night. But it did look like there was pretty extensive flood damage based on videos that were posted to social media. But we'll see. They're saying that there's not going to impact anything and that the Oilers facilities will still all be up and running and available for Phase 4 of the playoffs and for the Oilers camp. So we'll see, but certainly some interesting and somewhat scary developments last night in Edmonton from this freak storm. Now, we also saw an update that was kind of interesting from Elliot Friedman regarding some more tidbits from the new CBA, indicating that apparently there's teams that were complaining about the fact that the Maple Leafs would leave a lot of their training facilities and practice facilities open throughout the summer months so that their current players who remain in the Toronto area, as well as a lot of prospects who come to Toronto to train with the big team during the offseason, they felt there was a disadvantage, or they're unhappy, I guess, with the fact that that was happening, which is kind of weird in my opinion. Obviously, I understand that not all teams have the budgets that the Leafs do. Not all teams have the type of facilities that they do, but that's really not their problem, in my opinion. I'm really surprised the league would mandate that into the CBA. Obviously, I know I can understand other teams might be envious of what they can do during the offseason. But obviously, every NHL team has their own, sort of financial circumstances. The Leafs, as we know, are a very wealthy team. They have deep pockets, and if they can provide great facilities for their players and prospects to train it during the offseason, then all the power to them. Odd and confusing as to why other teams would be so unhappy about that. Maybe they should work on, developing their own facilities to be on more equal level ground. That's there in my opinion. Now, of course, another note regarding the Leafs, apparently during phase 3 here, during training camps, the Leafs were having some NHL officials come in to be part of their practices and drills and scrimmages and whatnot, and apparently that's gotten around and other teams got aware of this, and the league has put a kibosh on that as well. Of course, a lot of NHL cities and teams don't have easy access to referees, so they felt that was an unfair advantage. Not really sure exactly why they'd need to have referees there anyway. Typically, coaches can look after that and kind of facilitate their own practices and drills, but that's something else that the Leafs were kind of caught doing here that the league put a stop to. So some odd developments there during phase 3 of the training camps. We do have word as well from the Vegas Golden Knights that they plan to name a team captain in the near future. They won't have one for the upcoming playoffs, but the first team captain in franchise history will be named prior to the beginning of the 2021 NHL season. So obviously that's not too far away. Obviously Vegas so far in their 3 years of existence in the NHL has yet to name themselves their first ever team captain, but head coach Peter DeBoer was recently quoted as saying that they would be doing this sometime soon. So obviously that'll begin the speculation on who the team captain could be. Personally, if you look around their roster, I think an ideal candidate myself would be a guy like Mark Stone. By the time next season rolls around, he'll have a couple years with the franchise. He's got a long-term contract. He's a big-time player, great leader on and off the ice, really leads by example in his play. I think he'd be a terrific possibility there to be team captain. I think to a degree, you'd see guys like Riley Smith or Jonathan Marchessault be considered, maybe Nate Schmidt on the back end. Obviously, at one point, it was kind of viewed upon maybe Derek Englund being team captain, but obviously that's never come to be, and at this point in his career, unlikely for sure. But personally, for me, I would pick Mark Stone, but I'd love to know who you think Vegas should pick as their first ever team captain. The NHL also announced today the nominations for the Vezina Trophy. So the 3 finalists are Connor Hellebuyck of the Winnipeg Jets, you got Andrei Vasilevskiy of the Tampa Bay Lightning, and Tuukka Rask of the Boston Bruins. Now, in my opinion, this is Hellebuyck's award. I really think he's been the best goaltender this year, but I guess we'll see. All 3 goaltenders certainly had really solid NHL seasons, and I guess we'll have to wait to see who wins. Now, of course, as always, when we talk about these other award nominations, I'd love to know what your thoughts are, and who do you think deserves to win the Vezina Trophy for the 1920 NHL season? As I mentioned as well, I want to look at some offseason stuff regarding the Flames and the Islanders. Now, there's still a lot of talk and speculation about what's going on in Calgary. I know we've talked about this on a couple of different occasions, but yet there's been no change in what's going on with their training camp and how they're doing things there. Now, of course, as we know, star player Johnny Gaudreau has been part of the second group, which many people have questioned. We've seen general manager Brad Treliving come out and make comments about how great a shape he's in, and he's flying out there and it's the best he's ever seen him, which I find extremely weird. Now, of course, I personally haven't seen Gaudreau play in practice, so I can't speak to how he looks on the ice, but it just seems odd to have the general manager come out and to really not only try to disparage the rumors that he's either out of shape or something's going on with him, but to really go on and on about how good he looks out there when he's not even playing with the main group. Now, the other part that's a little bit odd about this is the group that he's skating with does have some other guys that likely are going to be players that are regulars here normally for the Flames, including defenseman Noah Hanifin. You got Milan Lucic, Sam Bennett, and backup goalie Cam Talbot. I mean, they're all guys who get a fair bit of playing time with the Flames that are in this second group. So I'm not really sure what's going on, but as we've talked about before, and I know there's been recent mention here on Elliot Friedman's 31 Thoughts podcast that just came out yesterday that he talked about Gaudreau and the Flame situation here a little bit as well. And he was asked by host Jeff Merrick, do you think this is the last ride for the Flames here before something drastic is done? And he just said maybe. He didn't think there was a high likelihood that Gaudreau would be traded sometime soon, but did admit to, when talking here with Jeff Merrick on this podcast, that there is a possibility that the Flames might decide to make a trade here if they don't have playoff success. But the one way he justified them not doing it, which does make sense, is given the circumstances of this year's playoffs. These are not ordinary playoffs. These teams have been off for several months waiting for the NHL to come back. Hub cities without fans. It's just a really unique set of situations. And you just can't help but wonder if teams might be a little more gun-shy to make changes given the circumstances that these players are playing under. But at the same time, though, some of these rumors persist about Gaudreau. You can't help but wonder what's going on. How will the Flames do in the playoffs? And will we see some movement if they don't see that playoff success? I mean, clearly, this team is not super young anymore. They need to be taking some steps forward. I do fully suspect some kind of change. And it could be something significant depending on how things go this year. Now, another team here I want to look at is the New York Islanders. I think the Islanders are going to be one of the more fascinating teams to watch during this NHL offseason once the season is complete. Obviously, we have a whole new market, a whole new landscape. And if you take a look at some of the contracts that you're going to need to see completed here in the near future, that's going to possibly set the market for upcoming contracts now that everything's kind of in a different situation. I think Matthew Barzal's contract with the Islanders is going to be potentially a real trendsetter here and could set the tone for how we see other contracts completed. Now, many feel that he's going to be looking for a big-time reward here on his contract, looking for 9, 10, maybe $11 million. Possibly looking for Mitch Marner money, as he could draw himself as being comparable to what he does for the Islanders compared to what Marner does for the Maple Leafs, which, you really can't argue, but you can argue the fact that the landscape here, like I said, has changed a bit with the market conditions due to the pause, the pandemic, lost revenue, and all those sort of things that's been impacting everyone around the National Hockey League. But, of course, the Islanders are a team that's going to be having to make some moves no matter what you do because they're going to be really tight up against the cap. They don't only have Barzal to sign, but they have Pulock and Taves on the back end as well, who have become pretty important pieces back there. They have a bunch of UFAs, which more than likely, a really good chance that none of those UFAs return. I mean, you get Thomas Greiss in the net, which is pretty much a guarantee. And now that they got Ilya Sorokin, you can pretty well bank on the fact that Varlamov and Sorokin will be the goalie tandem next year. You've also got guys like Derek Brassard. You've got Matt Martin. You got Tom Kuhnackel, as well as defenseman Andy Green that they brought in at the trade deadline. Pretty good chance that they can't afford any of those guys. Now, the Islanders do have a lot of interesting prospects who they could make the jump and fill some spots on the roster next year to kind of level things out from a salary perspective. Obviously, some other guys that could become trade bait as well would be guys like Leo Komarov or possibly even Andrew Ladd. Now, there was a lot of talk leading into the NHL trade deadline, but on Andrew Ladd, Zach Parise swap, there were some other pieces in retention of salary, draft picks. There was a bigger package than just those two, but there was a lot of talk between the Wild and the Islanders on a swap for, what each of them would refer to as a not a very favorable contract. Of course, Parise has a lot of history with Isles GM Lou Lamoriello from both their days with New Jersey. Obviously, Andrew Ladd hasn't really worked out with the Islanders, and he could use a fresh start to see if he can regain any kind of form to remain a regular NHL player through the remaining part of his contract here. So that's another trade we could see. But the trade itself was very complicated before, and having the cap the way it is now for the foreseeable future is certainly going to complicate that deal that much more, and certainly, like I said, probably makes it even more or less likely here that it could happen. But the Islanders are going to be a team that are going to have no choice but to cut some salary if they're going to want to retain Matthew Barzal. We've talked about the fact before that he could be an offer sheet target, and there's lots of teams out there who would love to get their hands on Barzal that would not mind giving up a decent package of draft picks to make that acquisition. And I know a team like Montreal showed last year they were not afraid to go after a guy like Sebastian Aho. Could we see them possibly even do it again? Hard to say. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation about Bergevin in Montreal around offer sheets and what he might do this year based on what he did last year and so on. Clearly, the Habs are a team that's in transition here, need to make some changes, and they could use a big-time center like Barzal. Not to say that they're for sure going to go after him, but the Islanders need to be aware that teams are going to be looking to make a move here and potentially could target him with an offer sheet if they can't get enough salary lined up to make sure they can get him signed before that can happen. And the Islanders are going to have no choice but to move some players out to have a real good shot at making that happen. So we'll see what happens. Do you think the Islanders and contract for Matthew Barzal could be a major trendsetter for this new NHL market moving forward? If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.